Welcome to the Dynamics of Everyday Life, where we demystify some tricky concepts and get to know ourselves a little bit better. Welcome back to the Dynamics of Everyday Life. Today I'm pleased to welcome Sam Lancashire to the show. Sam is the founder of Creating Lightbulb Moments and is passionate about getting rid of tick box training in the workplace. Join us as we talk about all things training and learning and what to do if you're voluntold to attend a course. So welcome back to the show, everyone, and I'm delighted to welcome another guest to the show today. I'm welcoming Sam Lancashire, and Sam is the founder and CEO of a company called Creating Lightbulb Moments, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. So Sam, introduce yourself, please.
Well, thank you for that kind introduction. So as Julia already mentioned, I am Sam Lancashire, and Creating Lightbulb Moments was set up in March 2023 to help teams, leaders and sellers improve their performance and productivity. I like to think that I help people make the tough and tricky soft skills easier by delivering impactful training, mentoring and coaching. And my mission is I'm on a mission to bin low impact tick box training, because if I think about the training that I've done myself over the years and some of the training and learning and development activities I was asked to put together in my corporate career of 17 years in that space, I think we can probably both agree that we've had enough tick box training. And so my mission is to get rid of that as much as possible whenever I work with a client or a cohort.
I love that. And that was when the first time we spoke, that was the thing that really drew me to you, because I have sat through many of those training courses where you think, oh, Lordy, how old do they think we are? And so I'm delighted you're on that mission, because I think it's one that really needs to happen.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, when you look at sort of like the research around how we learn, and also then you look at the drivers around why we want to learn, and maybe we can chat about that a bit more in a little while. They do vary, particularly as we get older. And so tick box training just doesn't cut the mark. It's not like a one and done approach. We need to kind of sort of like reinforce and re-engage, and also make it valuable too, because if there's no what's in it for me, if there's no with them, then you're less likely to want to get on board with it. And at the same time, when we get given these trainings and things from our employers, there's often not a with them. In fact, the what's in it for me is often for the company, and that's where the tick box piece comes in, right?
Absolutely. I mean, the amount of times I've been asked, what are the outcomes? What are the outcomes for the company? And you think, hang on, I'm training people here.
Absolutely. And that's a really interesting point, because a lot of the time when I'm working with clients, often they'll say to me, I want to train my team on this. And instead of saying to them, well, what do they need to learn? I'll often ask them to think, well, what do you want them to do? Or what do you want them to do differently? Or how do you want them to feel as individuals or as a team? And you often get a different response, because you get into that more personal level where you are starting to find a what's in it for me point. And at the same time, if people feel that there's value in it for them, that's often going to show up then in the way that they do their work, but also for them as an individual, how they feel about life themselves and sort of like their mindset, which is why I'll often ask, well, how do you want them to feel?
That's a great point. I mean, it just makes me think of the difference between being sent on training, because we're all sent on training, and actually, I'm going on a training course and I'm really looking forward to it. There's a big difference there, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. And like I say, there's always going to be sort of like mandatory training that we need to do in the workplace. And even like if we decide to go to college or do a course ourselves, there'll always be parts of it that we might think, can't really get on board with that. And we might not take that as seriously as others. But if you can at least try and make that more engaging and talk their language and a little bit more, you're more likely to get them on board. And often it might just be, well, look, if there's one or two things that that they can take away from it that does help them with something, then it has been time well spent, even if it's something that is maybe not their hot topic, right?
So what would you say are the biggest stumbling blocks that you come up against when people are engaging your services? What are the things that you think, oh, you know what, I bet I'm going to come up against this?
Yeah, there's a couple of sort of key things that spring to mind that are often challenges. The first one is we don't have time for training. So they want to bring me in, or they want to work with me. And this also happened in corporate world, by the way. We're time poor. And it's a case of, well, again, what value are they getting out of the time that they spend with you, or completing the training? And then the second thing is, how can you break that up in a way that makes sense so that they start to do learning, let's say, in the flow of their work? So a real example would be, as opposed to doing role plays a lot, which I typically work with sales and customer facing teams, so service, marketing, all the teams that make businesses tick. And often in those worlds, we would experience role play where you try something out. I try and flip that and put it back in the flow of work, and think about real play. And so often I'll ask them to say, well, can you bring an example of how that shows up for you? Or if it's sales, can you bring that customer account with you? And what we'll do is we'll go on the journey together, so that while they're learning, they're actually putting it into practice. And that learning is happening in the flow of work, which instantly makes it a little bit more sticky. I mean, that's what the psychologists tell us, isn't it? For a lot of people, it is about that application. But then secondly, going back to the time poor piece, not making it a one and done training. So how many times have you been on an activity with work and you go and you attend this for maybe 1 day, 2 days, and then it's like you feel great, but nothing gets done afterwards. And at the same time, you've missed a massive chunk of work for those 2 days that you were out. So to get you back together again, it's kind of tricky. So when I'm thinking about handling the time poor challenge, I look at, well, again, what do you want to achieve? And how can I break that up in a way that makes sense for you, for your team, and for your business, so that it sort of removes that blocker? So that's one thing that I often come across quite a lot. The second thing is that often people will say, well, my team need training, or our organization needs training, but I'll know straight away that they don't take it seriously. And again, you have to sort of ask them, well, why don't they take it seriously? And is it a case of they've been absolutely frazzled by really poor learning and training sort of interventions in the past? And if you can flip that to say, well, is there an intrinsic motivation for them, their why, to come on that course? And if we can get to some of that, then we can make sure that if it's relevant, we include that in the agenda, because you're more likely to get sort of a willingness, as opposed to being voluntold for training, if it's a case of there is an element of resistance. And then I suppose the third thing is, often is learning can be seen as a bit of a punishment, or same with coaching. If you're told at work you need coaching, or it's like, oh, the F word is mentioned. And no, not that F word. I mean the feedback word. Oh, I'd like to give you some feedback. And straight away you can see people, like over the Zoom, or if you're in person, like their body language changes, and they feel like that instantly there's something wrong. And sometimes that limiting belief of learning as a punishment can come from back at school or college, where we had to do extra learning, maybe because we didn't make the grade straight away, or, there was extra work involved, because maybe something happened and we had conflicting priorities. So a good example is, if you were very good at sports, let's say, and you maybe put more effort into that versus your academic side, you would often think then that the learning that you had to do was a punishment because it took you away from the things that you liked. And often that's a challenge that I come up against. Whereas for me, it's about, can we change that mindset into almost like learning as curiosity, and sort of release some of that baggage that has possibly been brought with us into adulthood, or maybe that we've gleaned from really bad tick box training that we've had, and that we sort of like start to unlock the potential in what learning can bring us. So often I might say to people, you know, if I was here to train you on how to do your job, you're probably, whatever that is, you're probably in the wrong job. But if I'm here to say, if I could give you 3 to 5 things that would help you do your job better or easier or in less time, would that be a good use of your time? And in most parts, people can agree with that. And as a result of that, we're then starting from that learning with curiosity, as opposed to it feeling like a punishment that they've been voluntold they have to go on it. So they're probably the 3 biggest sort of challenges that I hear when I'm dealing with clients, and indeed just in the workplace in general.
They're huge, aren't they? I mean, when you were talking there, I was thinking, oh, I've got so many examples for all of those. I mean, when I used to work in mental health services and we got put on training, the amount of times I would sit there thinking, I have got an in tray as higher than me, and I'm going to miss 2 days now, and literally I'm just going to have to get back to the office and hit go, and it's not. This isn't helpful. So I absolutely appreciate why people can feel a little bit resentful and defensive, because then that ties in with the, oh, actually you've been told to go on this, so there's then the implication that something's wrong. I mean, I don't know if you've ever had to coach anybody who's been sent to you remedially and it's a very different experience than someone who goes, you know what, there's something I want to work on, so let's go and get some coaching.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, there's a couple of sort of things that on the personal level often raise the head there. And, you know, you hit on an interesting point around being asked to coach somebody. So there's 2 things. Sometimes, as I say, it can be seen as that punishment instead of it's actually a reward because it's an investment in you. And if you think about, for example, we've just had the Olympics, right? It's a really good example. You probably had 62 other million examples about the Olympics, but we'll go with it anyway. If you think of those people who get the medals and they get to stand on the podium, they don't go home now and go, oh, okay, I've got gold or I got silver or bronze. That's me sort of like, you know, done. And then in 4 years, I'm going to go back and do it again. If they're really, you know, passionate about their specialization and their body still allows them to get involved, they're back coaching, they are learning, they are getting feedback, they are looking for those incremental steps and incremental wins to make sure that they are ready to compete and do the best and be the best the next time around. And of course, it won't be in 4 years, it'll be another competition or what have you. And, you know, and business is the same as that. We're always sort of looking for, okay, we need to get this project complete. Or if you're in sales, you need to meet your quota or your targets this month, this quarter, this year. And yet we live on our past successes and we're not sort of almost trying to keep that saw sharp like those athletes do. So that's sort of one perspective that I always try and put to people is, you know, the best sports people and athletes in the world are always being coached. And yet we as professional business people, we often think and perceive it as a punishment. And, you know, what if we flip that on its head and looked at the potential? So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is sometimes it comes with a fear of judgment or even like a fear of failure. And again, that can be due to limiting beliefs as well. Or it can be down to, say, the culture. So in an organization, if the culture doesn't support a learning culture, and I know that term probably sounds a little bit like fluffy and, you know, oh, learning culture, but it's literally like, how are you supporting your people to be the best that they can be every day? And of course, you can't go on training and you can't get full coachings every day because when would the work get done? You mentioned your in tray. So, like, I get you. But how can you include moments that matter that will help inspire people so that they feel that that is the culture? And then when training programs come around and opportunities for learning, they feel that it's an investment in them because it happens more often than not versus it's the exception rather than the rule. So they will be sort of like the 2 things I think can definitely be a positive influence with those challenges.
I love that in talking about it as it being almost a treat. I mean, I'd see my children going off to school and they're like, oh, can't bear it, I have to go to school. And I think, oh, wouldn't it be lovely? 8 hours a day of learning. I mean, it would just be fabulous, wouldn't it?
It would. And I suppose to sort of double down on that, I have just finished a program that I started in July. It was a program for chief revenue officers. So as I mentioned, I work with a lot of salespeople and sales leaders and business leaders. And what better way for me to find out how their world looks at the moment and how they need to run their business so that I can support them is to go to a course called CRO School, where you get taught about how to be a great CRO. So it's been running since July, and it was running on Thursday evenings and Friday mornings for myself here in Europe. It's a global course. And somebody at the weekend said to me, oh, I don't know how you find the time. And I said, well, I don't find the time, I make the time. Because to me, as you've just said, I'd go, oh, 8 hours of learning, brilliant. Let me try and make the time for that if I can. If it's something that really piques my interest and I feel it's going to benefit me, then I will look at that then as like a non-negotiable, as opposed to, oh, it's something that gets in the way of me doing something else. And often that something else isn't actually a high priority thing anyway. So often, and this could probably lead us into a totally different conversation, but it's not about like finding the time for it. It's about making the time and getting intentional about what it is that you want to achieve and your why. And then seeing, is this program, is this course, is this webinar going to help me with that? And what can I do with that information afterwards? That's when the magic happens.
It's to do with the value that we ascribe,
Yeah,
isn't it?
absolutely. It's that with them again, isn't it? It's that what's in it for me. Like we're all selfish at the end of the day, aren't we? It's like, well, that's great, Mr. or Mrs. Boss person. That's wonderful company that you want me to go on this training or you want me to attend this, but what's in it for me? Why should I care? And so, yes, once you get that value point, then you are more likely to get that engagement more often than not.
Yeah, it's, I mean, as coaches, we're lifelong learners. So it's almost like we have to remember that not everybody thinks the way that we do.
Well, that's it, isn't it? And it is about, again, looking for sort of those incremental sort of like wins or those little glimmers of, okay, I get that you're not like me, but if I could share three things that would help you, or give you a couple of things that might save you some time in the future, then would that be good enough for us to spend some time together, as opposed to lapping up every potential learning opportunity because it's something that you're really passionate about, which, as you've just mentioned, us coaches do tend to be lifelong learners. And so, yeah, it's about finding that middle ground sometimes when we encounter people that aren't necessarily on the same crazy page as us.
And I guess as well, it's
It
about
is.
making people feel safe, isn't it? 'Cause it took me back to when you talked about doing role plays. Because I recently, there's a particular training course that I'm attending as a student, and we were doing practice with actors as opposed to like role playing with each other. And it made such a difference because it felt more real. And the
Mm.
minute all of us heard the word, role play, you could feel we were almost going green with a bit of nausea around it. When we were like, okay, well, we're working with actors. Great, I've never done this before. Let's see how that goes. And we
Mm.
all felt quite safe doing it. So I think it's also as well, it's about creating the environment that people are going to be able to thrive in.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting you mentioned the use of actors there. I attended a leadership development program a number of years ago while I was in a corporate role. And part of the program was actually ran by a team of actors. And when we were going through scenarios, they actually didn't call it role play, they called it rehearsal, because what they said is that there's a good chance that this scenario or simulation that we're going to run through is going to show up for you at some stage in your life if you are going to be or continue to be a leader. And what better way to sort of practice some of the skills and some of the tools that you have started to add to your toolbox than to rehearse it? Because you're literally just preempting something, a conversation that's going to play out maybe next week, maybe in a month's time, maybe in 6 months' time. And so the way that they framed it did a lot to make that safe space, as you called it. And at the same time, challenged people's mindsets around how they approach that particular part of the program. And it was interesting because you said then you say the word role play, and like the F word, you see people's sort of bodies and demeanors shift and change. Whereas when they said rehearsal and they framed it a different way, there was like more volunteers than they could actually cope with to run the activity and sort of go through what that might look like. And so when you start to put it in people's sort of hands and walk the mile in their shoes and say, well, look, what if you could sort of like practice walking the mile in your shoes first? How would that feel? How is that going to help you in the future? Because no one wants to have this insert topic here, and it could be difficult conversation, it could be a feedback conversation, what have you. Nobody wants to have those, but what if you could rehearse it in a way that was safe and it was encouraging, and you've more chance of not getting it wrong when that time is critical for you to do it. So it's interesting you say that about the actors. I just wanted to share that. But as well as that, when I think about how things are put into practice, there's not enough done for me on people's like what I call the mindset work. So I'll give you an example from my world. I'll often get asked to train out a sales methodology or a questioning framework or a qualification framework. They're all really good, robust tools in the world that I work. But I'm never really asked to sort of like, can you help our sellers get more confident? Is there anything that you can do to help with them with resilience? Is there anything you can do that will help them focus on their mindset so that they are doing more things that help them be more productive? It's always about like more physical things, if that makes sense. And often in there, you also get things like product training and tools training. And again, they're very tangible and very physical. There's very little focus on the mindset piece behind it, and like that ties back to all sorts of things, including motivation, as you've mentioned, limiting beliefs, and personal fulfillment, and also sort of mental well-being and how people are feeling about being on the training. Because again, there's no point taking people out of their job if they're just going to experience 2 days or a couple of hours even of anxiety because they're that worried about what's going to be waiting for them when they get back. That's not a healthy state to be in. And so for me, that also should form part of many programs, not just in sales, but in any sort of way you're delivering a business skill or strategy. How are you supporting your people from a mental well-being position, as well as like the physical being and doing that you're asking them to do and take back into their role, because it all counts.
Well, absolutely. I think if people aren't motivated and wanting to be there, it's not only can you see them mentally withdraw, you can almost like see them physically withdraw, can't you?
Yeah, absolutely. And that shows up even in the virtual world, right? I mean, you'll see people with their cameras off, for example. Now, I've been facilitating virtually even way before COVID because I've had global positions in the companies I've worked in. And so you can't always travel. But you'll know straight away who is withdrawing because their camera will be off. They won't be popping things into the chat. It might be that they won't open up their microphone. Now, that could be just that they're not comfortable sharing in that way. Maybe culturally, that's not a good sort of fit for them right now. But you'll see in their demeanor, even like, if you ask for a show of hands and you wait for the emojis to pop up, if you've got 20 people on that call and only 5 emojis pop up, 15 already have not engaged and have possibly disengaged or withdrawn. And likewise in the room, you'll see people on their phones, sort of sitting back in their seat. Like the body language is very, very apparent. And as learning practitioners and facilitators, it is important that we can bring people back in a way that works for them, but also in a way that works for the rest of the room, so that that everybody is with you. But it is about looking for those cues. And sometimes if you can find out what motivates them up front, then you're less likely, I find, to get those early on, simply because you mentioned something that is actually of interest to them, or they see something as part of the agenda that they know they've given in like I often send a feedback form as an example. And like, if you could take away 3 things, what would you like to do? And if I can cover it, I will. When they hear that, you'll see them lean in, you'll see them pop their camera on, and you'll see them pop something into the chat box. You're getting that engagement that you need, and they're tuned back in and they're switched on. But yeah, absolutely. If you're just putting people on courses, it's not interesting to them. It is chalk and talk. It's not engaging. You can't expect anything but for them to tune out, really, and to sort of like, have that mental switch. It's like, I've been on classes, and maybe you have too, where somebody will speak at you for maybe 45 minutes, and then they ask, okay, anyone got any questions? And the only question you're thinking is this over? Because there's been no engagement for that time. And so again, I always try and encourage people to say, is this something that you can do, even if you're just doing a webinar? Because if you give me the time to build that in, it's going to make that learning a little bit more impactful. And also it's going to help me gauge who's with me and who's not checked out.
And I love it when you were talking about what do you want to get out of this, because then I'll try and include it. Because I've been on trainings where you just sit there and, like you say, you're being talked at, and when people go, got any questions, I'm thinking, please tell me it's time to go and make a cup of tea, because I just have completely checked out from
Yeah,
there.
exactly. And, sort of like trying to break away from these one size fits all approaches, I think, is something that can help with that issue. Of course, it is very difficult when you're running a business or you're leading a team to have something that is personalized for everybody. And I get that. But there are certainly more things that we can do in the workplace. And also as a coach, for example, to give people a more personalized experience, whereby it could be that it's more based on, their goals. It could be more based on their role. It could be something that's, everybody does the main thing and then you get a spin-off. But until organizations start offering these things, they can't expect people just to like want to go to training or want to complete it. And the other thing that I will say is that the whole thing about that tick box approach, it's often a case of, well, we need to report out that everybody's done the training, but we're not actually reporting out on the impact of that training. And that impact is a twofold. It's the impact on the people. So, how's it benefited them? How do they feel about it? Have they changed their behavior as a result of it? And then that leads you on to the impact on the business or the team. And so again, what did you want to change? Why did it matter? And is that happening? And if, I'm afraid if you're going to give people lots of micro learning, that's another flip side, isn't it? It's not a case of, oh, well, this training's too long. It's often this training's now too short, because they're getting lots of video-based training and e-learning, but then there's nobody sort of taking them by the hand and explaining where that fits in their world and that personalization to make it valuable. Then you're not going to get that impact on the business that you're looking for either.
I mean, just thinking about e-learning, the amount of times I'd imagine that people watch things on double speed, or they watch things while they're cooking the dinner, and you think it's not the same, is it, as actually being with somebody and having that learning experience.
Absolutely. If I may, there's a story I'd like to share with you on this very topic. I was watching a CRO, so a chief revenue officer, so a head of a big company in the tech world, and they had just started their role and they were doing their onboarding. And in that video that they put up, I think it was on LinkedIn actually, they basically said that they had consumed all of their e-learning content before they started at the company, that they advocated for putting it on 2x so they could consume as much as they could in the evenings when they were doing other things, and that they advocated for doing it in their own time. Now, I had a couple of challenges with this, as you can probably tell. The first one is exactly what you said. It's like, well, how do you know what they're getting out of that? Is it just a case of they want to consume it? And we are in a world of consumption right now. I mean, look at all the content that's available on all different types of social media platforms, and all written media platforms as well. But we're not necessarily in a phase yet where we're looking at what people do with that and how it impacts them, just that they've consumed it, right? Or they liked it. Great. So that was the first thing that this leader was advocating for. The next thing was advocating for doing a lot of work in your own time, potentially before you start in an organization. Now, as a coach and a learning leader, I am like always be learning. Is You'll probably see that if you follow me on LinkedIn, it's on a lot of my posts. That is one of my hashtags. So I'm not one of these people who says, you should only work from this hour to this hour. If you want to get on, sometimes you have to give a little bit more, but it has to work for you. And when you see a senior executive advocating that you should be doing these things, in your own time, and sometimes before you've even started in the role with the company, then that sets that tone and culture. Oh, is this what they expect? And straight away, any value that might be gotten from that learning could be diminished because they're already feeling pressure about consuming it, when to consume it, and how much. And so it just kind of, what started off maybe in this executive's mind as a positive message to put out there, there were many people who took a very different view of it, myself included, because it didn't frame the learning in a good in a good way. It was just a case of, you need to get to the end, you need to get through all the training, it's amazing, and do as much of it as you can in your own time on twice the speed. So like, I'm with you with that, because for me that's just not impactful. Now, what I will go on to say is that bringing people together in communities definitely has a positive impact on learning. And this doesn't have to be done in physical person. If done right, it can be done virtually using communication tools and so on. But the parameters have to be set there. And the guidance needs to be that, you're physically doing something as a team, as a group, and putting it into practice so that you can report out on what you got from it, what you learned from it, and what you're doing with it. So I do believe that there is more power in getting people together, be it in person or virtually in person, than literally just sitting in silo and consuming this content. Now, I'll close this answer by saying that there are some people who do prefer to learn solo. And again, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But there still needs to be a way to ensure that person, if they're part of your team, has understood and is using what they've learned in the right way. And that's where I think enabling leaders and managers to do more follow-up coaching and sort of get rid of this one and done approach is going to help with those people who do have that preference, because again, you're able to then sort of sync and determine what they got from it, what was useful, what wasn't, and what they've actually started doing with it, if they're that person that just prefers to be a bit quieter if they're in, let's say, a group activity. But sitting just consuming e-learning is never going to move the needle in the way that people think it will, or that they would want them to want to move the needle, for sure.
No, and it just reminds me of, if you've ever been in a coaching session and your client says, so that thing you said last session, that was really impactful. And you think, oh, well, I said a couple of things last training session. I wonder what it is you're talking. And then you kind of like dig into it deeper and you think, wow, that was what you got from that. I'm completely amazed. And it would be something, that I wouldn't have considered was a big light bulb moment. But they've obviously gone away and ruminated on it and thought, oh, actually, that's the really important thing. And I guess the point that I'm trying to make here is we all take different things from information and from conversations, And it's about, particularly with training that is for a point, it's how can we check that if we're putting content out there, people are getting the right message from the information that we're giving.
Absolutely. And as well, that they not only that they get that point, but they see value in actually doing something with it, so that it does help them, in their role. It helps them prioritize differently, it helps them have a better conversation, helps them use the system with less errors, whatever it might be. Yeah, I agree 100%. I think as well, some things that sort of help with this is, again, the framing and sort of like how leadership or managers get involved. So trying to move from this training or this enablement is a requirement, and flipping it to this is an investment in you. And instead of the conversations like, well, you didn't attend that training, or did you attend that mandatory training? And I hate that M word. It's nearly as bad as the F word. I like to think of things like, like, how have you, so since we last sat down, how have you grown from some of the activities that you've done in the last 2 weeks? And those activities could be training, it could be, peer discussions, it could be one-to-one feedback with somebody, and it could be actually putting it into practice, and using it. So again, it's looking at the outcome over the process and trying to sort of use that coaching curiosity and that mindset that comes with being a coach and willingly being coached yourself to deliver something that's much more powerful than just, yes, I attended that or I completed that and putting that tick in the box. I think that once those conversations start happening more, organizations and individuals will be more likely to get on board with their own self-development, because who doesn't want to do something easier? Like, if there's something that you're struggling with, why wouldn't you want to do it in a shorter time? Or why wouldn't you want to do it and it be more impactful once it's done, as opposed to having to keep going back to it 3 or 4 times because you just didn't get it right? Who wouldn't want that? So it's just, to me, it's just not being positioned in the right way.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I could talk to you all day about this. Being a coach and a trainer myself, it is absolutely something that lights me up when we talk about it. But I'm just thinking, and I'm going to do something now, which as a coach shouldn't do, which is I'm going to stack my questions.
Go for it.
And I'm just thinking, it's kind of like, to wrap things up, if you had, let's say we have people listening to the show who are people who either attend training or people who commission training, what would you like them to take away from our conversation?
Well, let's look at the people who attend training first. I would invite you to think of it as an investment, because essentially it is, but it's only going to be more of an investment to you if there is something in it for you. So is there a way that you can talk to the facilitator or talk to your manager in advance and say, it might be useful if we were able to include these things? No, you're not always going to get a bespoke course, as I mentioned, but often if feedback is given before content is created and plans are put together, I know myself, I always include learner feedback into my lesson plans and also into any subsequent activities. So I would invite learners to kind of see it as an investment, see if they can get involved. And also, even if you're sort of voluntold to go on one of these things, look for those, what's 2 or 3 things that I can take away, as opposed to, oh, well, this doesn't apply to me, full stop, because there's obviously a reason why you've been asked. So I'm guessing there might be something in there. So that's a sort of that mindset thing again. And then the other thing I would say to the learners is, if you do get something out of it, if it does help you, let people know. Let your peers know, let your manager know, talk to the facilitator if you can. Hey, listen, when I did this thing that you put together, it really helped, and this is what happened. Because again, that just shows you and everybody else that there is value in that investment that you're putting back into yourself. And also it gives you an opportunity to showcase all the great stuff that you're doing through going to these sort of trainings or completing these workshops. So that's from the learner perspective. If I flip it to sort of the the leader or the business side, what I would always suggest is, think about the outcome that you want to focus on versus what you want them to learn. So a good sanity check for me here is, what would you like them to do, or what would you like them to do differently? How would you like them to feel? And sometimes like, oh, I just wish they'd be more confident in making a decision. Well, what's stopping them making a decision? And then we can get to the root cause of that. And often that's something completely different than the topic that was going to be positioned for training in the first place. So I would ask sort of leaders and folks in the business to focus on the outcome and treat your learners, so that could be your team members or it could be the wider organization, as your customers, and think about what value are they going to get out of this. Because when you ask people to attend training, it's a big investment in your time and money and resources and in their time. And if they're in sales, which a lot of my clients and learners are, it is their money, because it stops them from, getting on the phone and going out to meetings. So where's the value for them to do that? If you think of them as a customer, you won't go wrong. And then tie some of the value points to the bigger organizational objectives, so that as a leader, you can then turn around and say, well, there was a return on that investment because it's impacted the business in X way, and it's impacted our people and how they feel about it in Y way. And again, you're then not looking at it from a numbers perspective, but you're looking at it from a very human perspective, because again, who doesn't want to be championed for, doing something really well? And that's sort of what keeps us motivated, and also keeps people in organizations too. If they're being coached, mentored, and developed, they are statistically less likely to leave and, look for other places to work, because they feel that there is that investment in them. So yeah, I think that's where I'd sort of leave it with the leaders to determine what are the outcomes, what do they want their people to do, and then how do they want them to feel. And if you can do all of those, then you're probably going to be on the right track.
Thank you. As I said, I could talk to you for hours about this. So if you have created light bulb moments for people whilst they've been listening to us, how do people get in touch with you?
Yeah, of course. I am available. You can contact me on LinkedIn. So I have my personal page under Samantha Lancashire, and you'll know it's me because I have FLPI at the end of my name, which is the Fellow of the Learning and Performance Institute. So you can see my learning doesn't stop either. I always ensure that my professional development is of the highest standard, so I can make sure I deliver the highest standard to you. So that's how you'll know it's me. And I also have a Creating Lightbulb Moments page on LinkedIn and on Instagram. And I'm just having my website rebuilt, which will also be creatinglightbulbmoments.com. And that'll probably be live in about 4 weeks.
Exciting. Well, what I'll do is I'll make sure all of that goes in the show notes in case people haven't been able to get a pen and piece of paper to scribble that down quickly. So it will be in the show notes so people can access that. And I'd just like to say thank you, Sam, for coming on to talk about this topic. I mean, it's a topic that's incredibly close to my heart. So thank you for coming on and sharing your passion about it.
I really appreciate the opportunity to come and chat. And it's always nice to sort of be able to advocate for this, because again, when we were chatting before you started the show today, and you said, what was your motivation for it? Because of circumstances at the time, I didn't get to go to university when I was like 18 or 19, because I had to get a job. So even though I got all my grades and everything, I never made it back then. And for me, if I can help people now make the most of themselves, without that barrier to potentially getting on because they maybe don't have a degree, and that still exists, even though we say it doesn't, it does. It means that, I'm doing something good and they're getting something good out of it. And I think that's why I'm so passionate about learning. And not only that, when I set up on my own, I was so passionate to try and do it right this time, because there's so many ways that it's, not done the right way, that I just feel that people are missing an opportunity. And I'd really hate for that to happen. So I appreciate the opportunity to come and chat to you about that today.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Dynamics of Everyday Life. Please hit the follow button for future episodes and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. You can follow me on Instagram at The Dynamics of Everyday Life or find me on LinkedIn at Julia Rogers. I'd love to hear from you and hear your thoughts on dynamics. The Dynamics of Everyday Life is brought to you by Coaching 42 and the fabulous team at the Podcast Boutique.